All right, today we're going to go ahead and cover some of what we covered in class on using booleans to create a small oil lamp for our dock scene. So we're going to use this, and we're going to create the lamp post for the lamp to sit upon. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a simple cube. Come to my polygons, grab my cube primitive, go over to my attribute editor, polycube1. I'm going to add in one division extra in width, height, and depth. So I'm going to put each division on 2. Notice this is going to give us our absolute center point. I'm going to find the general size I'm going to make this. At this point, I'm just going to crank it up to, let's say, 2 all the way around, and I can scale it a little more after the fact. Alright, this will work. So, from here, I know that I want my lantern to have some holes cut through it so that it just have these little stems. I can see the light coming from the inside. But I also know that I want my lantern to be rounded. So we talked in the other class about Euler operations. That if I cut my holes using the booleans first, you remember we had some funky geometry going on. So I want to get it as close to the shape that is the end shape first. So I'm going to round this much the same way we rounded our barrels. So I'm coming to my top view, tap my space bar, I'm going to right click, go to vertex mode, and then marquee select, hold down shift, and then marquee select again in order to get these particular middle vertices. I want to go to my scale and scale out in the X and the Z to give this kind of a rounded feel. That looks good. Alright. From here, I'm going to make myself another cube. Just going to pull that out like so. We're going to use this one as the cube that we cut the sides out with. Alright. So with this particular cube, it was already at the center point. So in reality, we don't need to do anything. So I'm going to hit undo so it goes directly back to the center point. We haven't moved this. We haven't moved our cube. All we're going to do is I'm going to elongate this in its depth. So why is it doing its thing? There we go. And I'm going to look at my geometry through the wireframe shaded preview so I can kind of see where everything's going to be. Alright. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, scaled out in my X and Y. I'll look at it from my front so I get a better understanding of how thick these walls are going to end up. Alright, that looks pretty good. Come back out here. I'll make a duplicate of this tool by hitting Command D, and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. Look at my channel box to make sure it was exactly 90. I was on 93, don't want that. Alright, so this is the beginnings of what this is going to look like. So in order to use our Boolean, remember we have to select our object, the main object we intend to keep, and then select the tool that cuts that shape out of it. All right. So in my modeling area, we then come into our mesh window, booleans. I'm going to use the difference, and this will cut the tool out of my lamp. Notice now I have this new hole. I'm just going to hold down Shift and then select the next tool, and I'm going to hit my G key, which repeats that last action. Alright. Now, in the last Booleans video, we talked about ensuring that you delete your history in between each one of these operations. That is definitely important in most cases. Now you'll notice that we have some geometry that we're going to have to fix in here too. We can avoid that by setting up our tools differently and prepping our model beforehand. So right now we can see that we're going to have to connect all these corners. That's not a big deal. But we also see that our center lines here and here don't exist, even though they do on the bottom. Neither do the center lines here on our side posts, right? So if we had set up our initial tool to have those subdivisions to mimic this, those lines would be there already. All right, so I'm going to step it back just a bit so we can look at each of these and then give them a few subdivisions. All right. Do it in there. So I'm going to go to my mesh tools, multi-cut. I'm going to hold down my Shift and my Control and find that center point here, and left click. That gave me an edge loop right on the center, and I'm going to do the same thing this direction. Now I have two new edge loops. Alright, notice they're lined up perfectly with the existing edge loops of what will be our lantern. Alright. Back in object mode, I'm going to select this guy, hit my G key, and that'll pop me back into my multi-cut tool. Hold down Shift, which gives me my center point, and then hold down Control, which then gives me my edge loop. Click. I let go of Control so that I can see where my center point is again. Push down Control, still holding Shift, and I go back and I click one more time. Alright. Hit Q to cancel out of the multi-cut tool. Right click, object mode. Alright. So now when we make this cut, I'm going to grab these, mesh, booleans, difference, and then hold Shift, click, I'm going to hit G, and we'll do the operation again. Now, you can see that it added this division in, right? We're still going to have to clean up just a little bit, but not nearly as much as we did before. All right. At this point, I'm going to delete the history because I'm happy with where this is at this point. And this will keep me from having too much overhead in the history department on this model. It basically helps me avoid errors as I go. From here, I'm going to go ahead and clean up my geometry. So I'll grab my multi-cut, connect these two pieces. Do the same thing on top. Remember, you have to hit enter once you've made those cuts. And then I'm going to clean up these corners. So I'm just left clicking, and hitting enter once I draw my line. You can do multiples at the same time, which will save you a button click and just a wee bit of time. Finish this guy up right here. Alright, so now we have all four-sided polygons, and we're ready to move on to make a base and a top for this lamp. So I'm going to hit my Q to exit out of my multi-cut tool, or right click and go back into face mode so that I can start doing some extrudes. I'm going to start off with the base. So in face mode, I'm going to select while holding shift these bottom faces, and we're going to extrude this down. Go to my modeling tools, extrude, and I'm just going to hit my W key, which is translate, and just translate this straight down in the world to thicken up the bottom just a little bit. It looks pretty good. Come up to my side view real fast, or my front view, both work. And I'm going to highlight across to give myself just this ring of faces. So that's a marquee select. Notice, just a click and drag. Then I'm going to extrude one more time. Remember, you can use your thickness and so forth, but because I intend to extrude these with the world, not based on the normal or location of that normal or its object position, I intend to move it based on the world. So I go into R, which is your scale, and then scale out accordingly. Now, if I'm using my universal manipulator, the center one, it's going to make everything fatter. Alright. What I want to do is only scale on the X and the Z. X and Z. Just like so. Just give myself a little bit of width right there at the base. Alright. So this will work for now. Now we need to get a bit of a roof on this thing. So I'm going to come back in and select my top faces and extrude those just the same as we did the bottom. Extrude, W, translate up just a wee bit. And I think I'm actually going to scale these out considerably. This is going to be the beginnings of a roof. Alright. It's looking pretty good. I'm going to extrude one more time. W. Translate these up. Or about to here, I think. And then I'm going to scale these in. Notice now we're starting to get a roof shape. Alright. I'm going to repeat this process a few times. Extrude, translate, scale. Extrude, translate, and scale in one last time. Alright, now I want to come in here, right click, go to my edge mode, and I'm going to click while holding shift around this particular edge loop. And I'm going to translate it up in the Y to push the edge of this roof up just a wee bit. That way it's actually got a lip, an overhang. Alright. That's looking pretty good. At this point, what we need is something to hook this in with, right? So some sort of loop here to hook it to a chain so that we can then hang it. So there's plenty of ways we could do this. We could extrude these faces on each side and slowly but surely work them on up around. Or, because we've already been talking about our booleans, we can use the Boolean union tool to add in a torus. So I'm going to use my polygon torus, which is up here in your dock. I'm going to pull this up. I'm going to rotate it. .90 degrees. I'll come to my attribute editor, channel box. Make sure that's 90 degrees exactly. Then I'm going to come to my attribute editor, polytorus, and I'm going to start scaling this thing until it fits right around here at the top. Alright. Now, you have two different radiuses inside of a torus. You have the radius of the overall object, and then you have the radius, which is the section radius. So it's how thick is the tube here. So if we crank it up, it turns basically into what looks like an orange. And if we crank it down, we can get it to what looks like a wire. We want something right in the middle there. Now this slider is really touchy. So I'm just going to type in 0.1 for now, or we might end up changing this. And I'm going to bring this guy down to, let's say, 0.5. Alright, I'm going to translate him up right about to here. And because I'm doing some low poly stuff, and because I don't want to have to deal with all of these different subdivisions, I'm going to crank my subdivisions down quite a bit. Subdivisions on my axis, let's bring those down to right around 8 looks good. And my subdivisions in height is how many times around. I'm going to do the same thing. Let's do 8, looks still like a bit much. There we go. Let's do 4. So essentially it's a torus cube. Alright. From here, I generally like what's going on. I know that I'm already snapped to the center, so I don't have to worry about this particular edge loop, right? All I need to worry about is, do I like the overall size and position? I'm going to bring this down just a wee bit so it's lined up somewhat in the center here of that face. That looks good. Now, we're going to come in and we're going to use our union tool, Boolean union. So I click, make sure I'm in object mode, I click my initial one and then shift click what I'm adding to it. I come to mesh, booleans, and then I go to union. And that gives me one object that deletes all of the interior faces. So if I were to zoom into this guy, there's no loop inside. You can see right here on the right hand top are the faces for this torus. Alright, so now we need to clean up some of this face. in order to get rid of these multi-sided, more than four-sided faces. So I'm just going to grab my target weld tool, my multi-cut tool, grab here, and I'm going to hold down shift, click to here, and then connect it in right there. Alright, I'm going to do the same thing around this side. I'm going to select, hold down my shift, and I'm just selecting this 50%, basically the middle of this face, to keep it nice and lined up. Alright, generally speaking, that looks pretty good. Now if I want to get fancier here, I can pull this center point up just a bit, just so we don't end up with water theoretically landing right there. And because we've done that, you want to make sure that your faces bend the right way when they render. So if I pull this up, as we talked about with rendering a nail, it's not a guarantee that you're going to render this triangulation the same as you would expect it to. So I'm actually going to grab my multi-cut and take care of that. I just add in one extra cut. Alright, there you go. That's going to guarantee those faces bend the direction we want them when the light hits and when we start rendering. Alright, that's a lantern in a nutshell. Now we can put in some glass. We can raise this bottom up a little bit, give it a little bit of cove if we want, make this a little bit fancier. Let's do that real quick. We've got a few minutes we can still spare. And hit my Q to get out of my multi-cut tool. I'm going to come back into face mode. I'm just going to grab these bottom faces right here, and I'm going to extrude them upwards just a little bit, and then scale them in a wee bit. This is just giving me a little bit of dimension on the bottom, make this object a little more interesting when it's hanging around, swinging around. You can kind of look up at it and see what's going on. From here, if we really want to, we could also add in some feet. So perhaps we go into our edge mode. I'm going to grab this edge, that edge, and this edge. Oh, let's hold down caps lock. It's not going to do much. And I'm going to translate those down just a little bit. There we go. Now if you were to sit this down, you get no rot on this wet dock surface, but it would still line up nice and square. And it just makes it interesting to look at ornamentally. So now we need to pop in some glass and maybe a candle. Candle, pretty easy. I'm just going to grab my cylinder and go to my attribute editor, probably cylinder 1. I'm going to bring my radius down to, let's say, 0.2, and my height down to, let's say, 0.5, and move this down, translate it down to Y, zoom in, hit F. I'm going to add a cap division, like so. Actually, I'm going to add one extra, so put it on 3. I'm going to go to my edge mode. I'm going to double click this cap. I'm going to scale it in like so. Then I'm going to go to face mode, model toolkit, camera base selection on. That way I can just select those faces like so without having to worry about grabbing faces on the back side. Now I'm going to turn it back off because I don't want that being on except for when I need it. And I'm going to extrude this guy up just a little bit. This is exactly like what we did for the apple, if you remember. So I've got this extruded up just a bit. And I'm going to come into my edge mode, multi-cut. Just going to drag a few cuts across here. Have to get out of my edge mode first. Every once in a while, you end up with an error to where it doesn't deselect things. So come back into object mode, edge mode, here we go. Now it should let me add my slices in. It's not allowing me to add my slices in for some reason. Select tool, grab everything, deselect everything, multi-cut tool. There we go. Looks like I wasn't in my multi-cut tool. No, it's still giving me issues. Edge mode, multi-cut tool. There we go. I don't know what that deal was. Alright, so I'm going to add in a few slices here. Come into my vertex mode, select. Just going to grab all these. Now it's going to give them a little bit of twist, a little bit of turns, slight bit of dimension. Scale these in just a wee bit, give them kind of an organic feel. All right, I'm going to grab this edge here. I'm going to push it down just a little bit. I'm going to grab this edge and I'm going to bevel it and add some segments. Right. I think I'm also going to grab this inner edge loop here, the base of the wick, push him down a bit as well. Alright. Certainly you can go in, you can play around with this quite a bit more until it looks far more professional, higher level, adding some drips and so forth. But at this point, we don't need that. For the most part, when you're making props, you want to add in as much detail as is absolutely necessary. So in reality, because I'm just going to have these hanging up, I don't even need the wick. I probably don't even need the candle. I could likely just put a light source inside of this and call it a day. I'm going to go ahead and add in my glass real fast. So I'm going to hit my cube, polygon cube. I'm going to scale this guy up to where he's the same general height. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to add a split right here in the center in my attribute editor in my width. Alright, so now I'm going to scale him up where he's just inside of my geometry. Then I'm going to come over here to my side view and then scale him down so he's got a pretty thin thickness here, thin depth. And he also needs to be as wide as my pane. There we go. Now, I'm just going to translate this guy forward so he sits just here inside. I right click, go to vertice mode. I'm going to highlight those particular vertices and I'm going to pull those forward so that they line up real well and give me a pretty even interior edge right here, like so. All right. Object mode. I'm going to make a duplicate. Pull this over here. Rotate. (180 degrees). And translate that forward so it lines up nice. There we go. And I'm going to do the same thing one more time. Duplicate, pull this forward. Now, one thing I need to make sure I'm doing is snapping this to the grid. So I'm going to hold down X and snap it to the grid like so. That way, I know I'm lined up perfectly in my center. Rotate here, 270 or -90. Either one will work. Pull him forward. Make sure it looks good. And one more duplicate. Translate it back. (90). And stick it in place right here. Clearly, you also want to make sure you go through and name all of your pieces properly. First, I'm going to delete all of my history, freeze my transformations, and edit, delete history all, because I'm happy with what this looks like. From here, I'm going to come in here and name this glass _ 01 and C. That'll name that one, that one, and that one. Now they all are glass. And this will be my lamp. Typically, you want to make sure you add a number, 01, because I'm going to have multiple lamps inside my scene. And then this, I know, is my candle, candle _ 01. All right, so everything is named. From here, I want to group these together, like so, and Command G to make a new group, which I'm going to call lamp group _ all one. And I'm going to move this pivot point up to the bottom of here, because when this swings, if I ever add animations into it, it would swing right about here. Alright. And I can actually snap it to that vertex by holding down V. and snapping it right there, pulling it up on the Y, and then set my point again. All right. Move this up just so it's not sitting right there. And freeze my transformations one more time.